There we go. Welcome, authentic friends. We are so glad that you could make it here. We are with my friend Rob Volpe, and he has a new book out called Tell Me More About That. Now, Rob is actually a author, a speaker, and he is a empathy activist, which is why we're having him here today. And he is solving the empathy crisis one conversation at a time. And so this is our conversation. We're solving the world. We're solving the empathy crisis right here in this one conversation. Welcome, Rob, to the show. And so glad, so excited to have you here. We met a few months ago on LinkedIn, and you had some really cool posts about empathy. And I was like, this is the backbone of what we're doing with the Authentic community. I was just like, it was this immediate connection. You and I talked. So I'm so glad that it came full circle so that we could have this conversation. And the book is launching. So let's talk about that. Welcome.
Awesome, Dave. Thank you so much. It's so great to be here. And yeah, it's been the longest 3 months or 4 months since we first talked, but we're here and it's great.
Yeah. Well, and I want to set the tone right away for how much of a connection you and I had. It was really cool. I think one of the statements that you said best right before we started recording here was your experience about the feelings and the emotions that you had of launching the book. So let's dive right into not even what the book is about yet, but your experience as a first-time author and feeling the results and the satisfaction that you were getting with that experience that you shared with me.
Sure. So I guess so the book officially launched on 2/22/22, which felt like the most appropriate day ever for a book about
Yes, by the way, that's
empathy.
absolutely amazing.
Right? I was so happy when the stars literally aligned for that. And we were able to hit that launch date. But the day before, I was actually taking a Peloton class with Christine Dercollet, who's my favorite Peloton instructor. And it was a new wave ride. So it was all new wave music from the early mid 80s. And she was talking during the class about how, because it was Monday morning, it was the beginning of the week and the journey that we're on. And instead of thinking about it as this kind of long slog, she's like, think about these, like the finish lines in your week, like 3 finish lines that you might have. And I was like, well, I got a big one. I'm saying this to myself because I'm in my garage on
Right.
my bike. But to myself, I was thinking, well, I've got a big one tomorrow. And I started thinking about how, it wasn't just any finish line. It wasn't just, oh, I got the report done or anything. It was like, this was 6 years worth of work off and on going
Wow.
into this. The emotional journey, there's a lot of myself in the book. It's my stories and my experiences with empathy that I use to bring the 5 steps to life. And I'm thinking about all of this, and the song she was playing was an old Depeche Mode song called People Are People, which is a song about empathy. And I'm like, gosh, this is also appropriate. And so I grab my phone and I start recording it for a second. And then I stop. And as soon as I stopped, like I just got overwhelmed with tears and just the relief and the release of realizing like, yeah, that finish line that I'm about to cross tomorrow represents 6 years worth of work and so much effort inside me. And then even from the time you and I talked back in the fall till now, the emotional roller coaster that I was on, like I founded a company. We've been around for 11 years. I've kind of done a lot of the things that you would do in that regard. But when you've written something and then you're not sure, like, is it good enough? Is it like, are people going to like it? And you go back and forth with, how good is this versus, oh my God, this is like, the best thing ever to this is the worst thing ever. And I had that back and forth for months. And then finally, the book, we got closer to the launch date of the book. And one of the things that happened on Tuesday, and again, I'm a first-time author, like I have no idea what you're supposed to do on a launch day, or like, do you do anything? Is it just another Tuesday? And so I wanted to try to be present and try to, be in the moment and enjoy it. And so I was like, all right, I want to go, because bookstores are, everywhere are carrying my book. So I wanted to go to a bookstore. I wanted to see the book like in the wild, as they say.
Yep.
So we went to Alexander Book Company, which is a small, and it's not really small. It's like 3 stories of books, but in downtown San Francisco, but it's an independent. So it's small in that regard.
Right.
Independent bookseller. Went in and they were so wonderful. And it was really cool. I got to see my first book and sign it. And that was great and rewarding. But the thing that really got me was the bombardment isn't the right word, but the outpouring of texts and emails that I was getting from, colleagues and clients and friends and family members, and it wasn't just my mom and my, dad
Right.
and sister texting me. It was like people throughout my life that were sharing with me, the Amazon delivery notification, like, look, it's almost here.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
One guy, one guy had a notification that the book was like, I don't know, it was like 10 stops away or something, like from getting delivered to his house. I have no idea how Amazon knew that, but they knew, like, okay, you're the truck is so far away and there's 10 stops between there and you. And that was cool. And other people showing me like the box open from Barnes and Noble with the book inside, or from Amazon, or sitting on their counter. A couple of people were posting them reading the book. And that was just so amazing that people cared enough to take a moment to let me know that the book had arrived, and that they were thinking of me and they were cheering me on. It was really meaningful. It was such a lovely outpouring of support that it just doesn't happen.
Well, and you don't hear about it for sure. It's not talked about as much.
No, but that was like the best thing. And so I was just like going crazy last week. Like I was like, I'm going to put all of these up. And so it was like my Instagram stories were filled with, look, it's in Portland, Maine. Look, it's in Portland, Oregon. It's in Boston. It's here. It's Miami. And yeah, it was really wonderful. It was really wonderful. That was the best feeling about the whole thing. Seeing copies of the book that I hadn't physically placed in somebody's hand. I've had the book for a few weeks now myself, and I've given it out to a few close family members. But to see the actual book, the physical book, like that they've bought, and it's been shipped to them, and now there it is, like, it's the coolest feeling.
Yes, you are pouring out passion right now, and it's very apparent. So this is such a beautiful conversation, perfect timing to be expressing this to the world, because I think that when you and I first talked, this was what attracted to us to have the conversation, was the empathy component, the gratitude component. And you've probably mentioned it 5 times without using the word gratitude, but like you're just oozing gratitude right now, and it's such a great concept.
Thank you. Yeah, I am. These things take a village, and it is one conversation at a time and one connection at a time. And hopefully every person that reads the book will be motivated to behave more empathetically, or reflect. And I'm already starting to hear some of that from people who've read it now. And then they'll they'll spread the word, and other people will pick up the book, and on and so on.
Let's get into that a little bit, because obviously that's really what we can do to help spread the messages. What is the concepts of the book? What are the 5 steps? What are you hoping that when people read out of it, like, what is their first takeaway? How do you want them to spread the information? Like, what is your best case scenario of writing this book?
Well, here, let me show you the book first.
Yeah, it's a beautiful cover.
Thank you. So yeah, this is the book. Tell me more about that. Solving the Empathy Crisis, one conversation at a time. And it's a book that it works on a lot of different levels. And I had set out intentionally, I didn't want to just write a book where I was didactically talking about empathy and saying, you should do this and you should do that. Because I find in previous sort of lives of my own, when I've been a coach or even when I'm doing training, I find people really respond when I'm vulnerable, when I share about my own experiences and my failures as well as successes. And so I took that approach to the book and used my own stories. So my day job is as a market researcher in the company Ignite 360. We do consumer insights work. So we're constantly talking to real people about how they think, feel, behave, and help our clients connect empathetically with the consumer. Because I do that, I have a lot of interesting stories and entertaining stories from going into, the dirtiest home in America, or other interesting situations where I sort of, okay, if I told you I lived in San Francisco, that's going to immediately paint a picture in your mind. And so it wouldn't be a surprise if I then said I was really uncomfortable when I went into the National Rifle Association show and to do a study on concealed carry. But it was really fascinating. And so I use those stories from my career and my personal life to help bring to life the 5 steps, which are all about what you need to do in the moment in order to get to a place of empathy with somebody else. And in particular, I talk about cognitive empathy because, as you know, there's multiple types of empathy. And I have subscribed to the framework of cognitive and then emotional empathy, with emotional empathy being that thing that we use with those that are closest to us, or in our prehistoric lives would be living in the cave with us. So they're our
Yeah.
family and our closest friends. And then cognitive empathy is what you use with the people from the cave down the road that you don't see very often. And they come over to visit.
I'm picturing Flintstones now. Thank you very much.
Totally. Yes. Barney and Fred and families are, there's emotional empathy, but it's the people on the other side of the quarry when they come over. You have to work to understand them a little bit better. And that's cognitive empathy, because you can't necessarily feel the feelings of that other cave down the road, because they have different rituals and beliefs and behaviors. You have to imagine what it might be like to be them, to find that common ground. Sometimes that gets into an emotional place, or it elicits. It's not just truly cognitive mental thinking. There is an emotional response that can come up, but it's more of a cognitive exercise rather than just kind of feeling the feels, because I know you so well. I can look at you and gauge and read your reaction to something and go, oh, he's about to cry, and I know what that's about and how that feels. So cognitive and emotional empathy. I write about it from a cognitive empathy perspective. And, it's the understanding that there's more than meets the eye to everyone. And we all have a story to tell, and we're all worthy of sharing and being heard. And so I tell some of those stories in the book in order to help people understand the 5 steps. Which then you had asked me, like, what are those 5 steps?
Yeah. Well, we'll get into that in a second. I really like this conversation of cognitive, because to me, that can inspire hope into a lot of other people, because you and I are in the trenches of empathy, and there's so many thought-provoking things around the word that a lot of people don't realize that there's a cognitive approach. And when you point that out to people, to me, that lets them know of, oh, I can learn how to do this, instead of classically right now, people either think that they're empathetic or they're not.
Yes.
And so your book brings hope and why there's actually 5 steps.
Yeah. And I try to demystify empathy. I think, empathy is broadly misunderstood unless you're really kind of in it. And even when I ask, I always start presentations and training programs like, give us a definition of empathy. And you end up hearing those two, the cognitive and the emotional side. It's like, oh, it's walking in the shoes of somebody else. It's feeling the feelings of somebody else, or it's seeing someone's perspective. And all of those answers are correct, but they all are requiring different things to get there and to do that and what that means. And so I try to demystify it all and make it feel more accessible for people to actually be empathetic and realize like it doesn't mean that you're giving up your point of view or your perspective. You get to hold on to that. It's just that you're making room in your head that there's another way of doing things, and hopefully stimulating curiosity about it.
Yep. Interesting. Tell me more about that.
Well,
but that's a true statement of how you've brought this full circle of empathy doesn't mean that you're disagreeing. Empathy doesn't mean that you are bipolar in your approach in the conversation. It means that you're curious, and so this is such a cool loop back of tell me more about that. It's very clever.
Yeah, and there's so so the book is layered with all of these things. There's the storytelling of my personal experiences. There's empathetic reflections at the end of every chapter, which are just prompts for people to think about based on what was in that particular chapter. So some of there's in one of the chapters I talk about, it's in the chapter about asking good, well, there's the 5 steps, and then there's multiple chapters in each section exploring the different steps and things that have happened to me. And one of the chapters, chapter 10, is called Let's Talk About Sex. And in it, because there are times where I've been able to do projects where sex has been either the focus or it comes up in various different ways, and I don't want to give it all away, but I told
the book spoiler.
but I tell in there the experience when my dad gave me the birds and the bees talk, and we were in the car on the way to the mall. And as I knew I'm a gay man now. I was not totally identifying as gay back then, but I knew something was a little different. And so my dad talking about like the thing that the penis is going to do with the woman, and I was just like, ew, this sounds so gross. Like, what is this? And so I got a text from a friend the other day, and she read that chapter, and then the next day she was taking her, and she got a laugh out of it, but the next day she was taking her 14-year-old son to the mall in the car, and she was thinking about that story and laughing, and she said, I just subjected him to bad 80s music instead.
Just as torturous.
just as torturous, and totally different. Mom, you're embarrassing me. So I set out to write something that was going to be engaging, that you were going to want to read, and that you would learn from while you were doing it. And hearing my stories helps people understand, like, oh, okay, there are these 5 steps. But empathy is in crisis in our society, and it's not just in the US, it's around the world, but the data that I've got is usually US focused, so we can go first.
Yeah.
But we just, Ignite 360, my company, we just did a survey back in January, and we asked people, and we'd asked this before, so we're into looking for changes over time. But we asked people a really what I think is a really simple and obvious question, which is, do you agree with the statement, I can easily see the point of view of others? And, from a research perspective, that's kind of it's a little embarrassing to say I'm a researcher and I asked this most obvious leading question you could, because of course you're supposed to say yes. Like you sound like a narcissist or a psychopath if you say no. And yet 31% of American adults over the age of 18 were unable to agree with that statement.
Right.
They were disagreeing with the ability to easily say yes. And because it's self-reported, that means that the real number is actually higher than the 31%. And you're just like, oh my God, like, wow, there is a real problem here.
Yes.
And then all the things we've been seeing now in the last 6 to 8 months with the Great Resignation and people leaving their organizations, partly because they weren't feeling supported empathetically.
Yep.
And yet, in another study that came out last summer, 90% of Gen Z 18 to 25-year-old adults indicated that they were more likely to stay at an organization that had empathetic leadership.
Wow.
Yeah. And yet,
it's clear writing on the wall.
Oh, yeah. And yet, only in another study from a different organization, they found only 1 in 4 employees could say that the level of empathy in their organization was sufficient,
Wow.
meaning 25% of organizations have empathy and the other 75% don't.
Yep.
Which is why, if you look at any leadership publication or anything, it's all about empathy right now.
Yeah.
And how do I become empathetic? Because it's not what we had been teaching people was the appropriate
Right.
sort of leadership model.
And I think it's a perfect blend too. And this is our space in Authentic of well-being, is a lot of people don't know how to describe the difference between the two because they don't know what empathy or communication structure in business is, and so they classify it as well-being. So if you add that into the mix of those stats, you're probably like much higher stats of people who are doing the resignation side of things and feeling unheard, simply because they're probably describing it as well-being instead of empathy.
Well, and let me find my 15 facts on empathy. I've got a little cheat sheet with
there you go,
data from all these different studies that I like to reference.
I would love to share that in the notes to this episode. Yeah, for sure. Send that to me.
I will for sure. Let me find it. And there was something I was looking at about belonging and inclusion, and the fact that if you are, where is it? One sec. Half of employees with empathetic leaders say their workplaces are inclusive, which is 3 times the response of those people that have less empathetic leaders.
Wow.
So there's definitely this sense of inclusion that's coming up. And that was from a study from Catalyst called The Power of Empathy in Times of Crisis and Beyond.
What I think is funny, but not funny, is all of this stuff is common sense when it comes to human nature. And you and I know it because you and I are on the same page or on this of
what does that say about us? Not you and I, but I mean us. Like
it's the same in the health and wellness field that I've been dealing with for 30 years, is like, go for a walk, right? Like, but for so long there wasn't the research supporting to drink water and get sunshine and exercise, right? And it's most of the stuff is, if we look back at our roots. So where's that disconnect? Where in the empathy field, where's the disconnect that we forget and we get lost in the research versus just being human?
Well, and I think, there's the sort of fear of it and the sense of weakness. And, I go back to, Henry Ford back in 1918 has a quote that I use all the time that I'm going to slightly paraphrase, but he said, "The secret of success is the ability to see somebody else's point of view and to adopt that angle as your own." That's empathy right there. And he was saying that 100 years ago. And then I think we tended to forget about it, during World War II and afterward. Because when you think about stereotype of the 50s and 60s, it was not empathetic. If you go back to, Mad Men is obviously a drama, but you weren't seeing like the messages that were coming out. It wasn't being taught in the graduate schools. If you're getting your MBA at Harvard, empathy was not part of the curriculum. You'd have to go and seek that out. Medical schools, empathy is not, empathy with a doctor, like your
I can attest there's no bedside manner class.
Right. Or they spend, somebody I was talking about, like they spend like 1 hour or one afternoon on it in the course of their entire training.
Yep.
And it's like, that's the most important thing. And yet they don't. So there's all these things that have been coming up in our education and the ways that the role modeling and the stereotypes Gordon Gekko was not empathetic in the movie Wall Street back in the 80s. You don't see the Wolf of Wall Street wasn't empathetic. Like, you don't see business leaders um, being praised for being empathetic. If you look at the Silicon Valley sort of titans of this current generation, there's no empathy that's being there. There's the new series on Showtime I was reading about, Super Pumped, and was it Joseph Gordon-Levitt is playing Travis Kalanick, the founder of Uber. And if you just go into that and read that story, like, that was, he had some pretty antisocial behavior pretty seriously. So I'm not going to use words
right, yeah.
to describe him, but it was really concerning. And that was championed. That was because he was, building this big, huge thing. I mean, you look at Facebook, you look at all the different mega Silicon Valley companies, there's not a ton of empathy that's been displayed. And those are the business leaders that people are looking up to. And I want to be just like them. And then, even, in the last 10 years or so, I can't tell you how many times I've had these sort of junior marketers, in the car because we're driving together to a respondent's house to do an in-home interview. And they'll talk about how, well, Steve Jobs never did, did research. It's like, okay, A, you're not Steve Jobs. B, yeah, he did.
Yeah,
actually.
he did.
And B, he's got really good intuition. So be quiet.
Well, I think it's such a great point of, like, there's, on average 29 million businesses out there, and we idolize maybe 10 of them, thinking that is the only path. And the reality is that there's way more billions upon trillions of dollars that are made from all of the medium companies that are more empathetic and more natural human, if you want to call them that. I mean, right, some of those tech leaders are still debatable on if they're human or not, or if they're cyborgs some back from the future. But it's an aspect of, I see it all the time in coaching, where people do idolize the extremes. We idolize the Michael Jordans, we idolize the LeBron James, we idolize the Steve Jobs, not realizing that is a superhuman path to actually get somewhere. And so when it comes to leadership and empathy in communications and business, we idolize those wrong people, when the reality is that most of the money that's being made and most of the successful businesses are actually the charitable ones. They're the empathetic ones. They focus on communication. They focus on lifting people up, supporting, all of those sorts of good things. That's actually the bigger business out there.
Yeah, absolutely is. And I mean, if you look at a truly successful business, it has empathy at its core. And it's not just, it's empathy within the organization with their people, but also externally with their clients, with their customers. They understand humanity and they are in service of, humanity. And you look at some of those other success stories, then particularly talking about servant leadership, that's all about empathy, and putting that into practice.
Well, let's flip it into practice. Let's put it into practice. What is the brief overview of the 5, and then we can dive deeper into them, and what are the action steps that all of our listeners can actually take immediately today?
All right. So the 5 steps to empathy, drum roll, please. First one is dismantling your judgment. I find, especially people in business or people with more education, this is the one that gets in the way. And it's about dismantling being judgmental. You still get to make judgments, make decisions, but being judgmental, casting aspersion gets in a lot of people's way. Second step is asking good questions. So you need to be asking questions of your team that are not threatening, that are open, that aren't leading, that are exploratory, if you really want to understand where somebody's coming from. And you need to do that because you're opening up to wherever they might take you and whatever is actually true and right for them. And if you ask a leading question, then you may not necessarily be opening them up for that. The next one is to actively listen. So active listening is not just what you're hearing, but what you're seeing and sensing, all the different senses, and I believe the sixth sense as well, your intuition. And if you are able to do that, it will give you a much, much richer picture of who somebody is and what they're all about. The fourth step is integrating into understanding. And this is based around one of the great misunderstandings of empathy, which is that I have to give up my own beliefs or my own values in order to see the way somebody else believes. And that's not the case. You need to make room in your head that just because you like chocolate ice cream, some people like vanilla, and that's okay, but let's be curious about the vanilla ice cream and what it is that they like about it. So integrating into understanding is that making room in your head that there is a different way of doing something, and you want to understand it so that you can then use step 5, which is using solution imagination. And so that's when you're really stepping into the shoes of somebody else and thinking about where they might be coming from, and using that in conversation, using that in your experiences with them, to reflect empathy and ultimately lead to a better outcome.
Got it. Okay. Beautiful. Let's loop it back to the first two, because I think that you said it perfectly. You said that this is the hardest. So the first one is being the hardest one to overcome, and that's the judgmental. And the second one, if my memory serves me correct, is being curious and asking questions without leading people. So, and I think that those two, my gut tells me that those are probably the easiest to become aware of, hardest to take care of. But it's something that the awareness piece, if we bring that today in today's podcast, we will leave them wanting to read the book and dive in deeper to it to actually take some action steps. So let's get into those two.
Sure.
I've personally struggled with this in the past, just simply because I've always been the hyper overachiever, like the person who constantly reads and obsessed over consuming content. And so I've in the past, I used to come with a lot of judgmental aspects where I thought that I would know it all in the beginning, right? Like coming through school and things of that nature. And when you're first getting started, and especially as a doctor, when I'm trying to help people, I would make some wild assumptions that I knew it all. And then patients proved me wrong consistently and knocked me down into an ego check. But how could people start to become aware of this concept on if they're doing it to themselves and the people surrounding them or not?
Yeah, so it is about having that kind of metacognition and self-awareness about yourself and what's going on. So, if you think about judgment, it's made up of your own biases, whether it's cognitive bias, affirmation bias, you've got your own past experiences, stereotypes, all of the stuff that makes you, you're carrying with you. And that will play itself out. It basically, the analogy I use in the first part of the book is it's like a brick wall that goes up, and you just can't, you have to dismantle it in order to get through it. It's so tall, you can't go over it, you can't burst through it, you've got to dismantle it. And it's the biggest, it's the hardest. Again, it's understanding that this isn't about making a judgment or making a decision, it's about dismantling, being judgmental, casting aspersions. So once you're aware of it, you can check yourself and go, oh, wait a minute, where's that coming from? And then start to figure out how to get yourself around it. And there's a few examples I use in the book from my own experiences. One being, I had a great grandfather who had his voice box removed, his larynx. He had a laryngectomy. Yeah, well, I forget the name of the surgery, but he had the voice box. And this is back in the 70s, and I was like 3 years old and freaked out. And the chapter of the book is called Crawling Away, because that's what I apparently used to do. And what all of the relatives that I have that knew him have said, he was just like the loveliest, gentlest man, but I was afraid of him because of his deformity.
Yeah.
And that ended up playing out in my life, where I'm uncomfortable when I see people that have some sort of a physical disability. And I've had to really work hard to dismantle that judgment and that fear that I have, to overcome it and go, wait, no, they are a person just like everyone else. They have every right to be heard and seen. And I've learned to engage with them differently. And then I go on, and so I write about an experience where I was doing an interview I was doing a focus group, and there was a deformity with one of the respondents, but I couldn't quite figure it out right away. But then I did, and had to, in that moment, I couldn't crawl away. I had to be present. I had to continue the interview. And then a couple of years later, I talk about how I had fractured my heel. And so I was wearing a boot, and I travel a lot for my job. So I was moving through airports, but suddenly I was in a wheelchair. I was the other. And the looks of pity that I was getting from people. And, it's like, well, wait a minute. Like, I
Yep.
just hurt my heel. Like, whatever. I'm still me.
Yep.
Like, don't. And I learned how I had to then engage differently with people. So some of it is like doing that exploration and understanding where your judgment is coming from, and being able to stop yourself and making the decision, like, okay, if, and how is that showing up? I was the other night, my husband and I were watching reality TV, and there was one participant on this show, and I was gonna say something that was, I was gonna cast aspersion on them, and I'm like, wait, why am I doing this?
Yeah.
And then I in that moment I decided, oh, fine, I'm just gonna be judgmental and say something. But in an interaction with someone, I would stop myself and go, wait, where is that coming from? Why am I doing that? And is there another way to think about it? Like, don't think and it can be with, coming in and being judgmental, like, oh, I know everything, in the way that you were talking, in that sort of God complex that doctors get bestowed with. And MBA, I think people get that as well. They think,
I think it says it on our diploma, actually. You are now godlike. Yeah.
You are now godlike. Bless you, bless you. You can do no wrong until, so yeah, it's having that awareness, figuring out where all of that's coming from, and making a conscious choice to do differently, and being courageous enough to do things differently. Whether that's to admit, I don't know everything, help me understand, and being able to ask that, or you're choosing different words, you're choosing a different path, but it is ultimately about recognizing where your judgment is coming from and addressing that. And for some people, that can require like a trip to a mental health professional, because judgment comes out of trauma. It comes out of it's your lived experiences, and you have to be aware of that and understand it.
One thing that really helped me start to I've always been like a very connected, empathetic type of person, but when I was having that godlike problem, I was making vast assumptions very quickly around people in the 30 seconds that I would be interviewing them about, their health issues and things like that. And one of the things that really helped me was, it took a while, but I'd learned the practice of just asking, oh, why? Oh, why is that? Oh, and so what that led me to explore was, okay, so and so, you are overweight. Why are you overweight? And instead of making assumptions about that they did X, Y, and Z, and what that led to was this beautiful understanding at a much deeper level, that the things that I thought that I knew actually helped to deepen my knowledge even further of what I knew. And then I started categorizing in buckets, and then I could ask questions, why-based questions, to figure out which category they were in, and then dive deeper into that category. So when I learned this trick, it was this instinct that I had to work on as a repetition standpoint, to control my urge to shut my brain down, breathe for a second, and then ask why.
Right. And you may have been judging someone for being overweight is, oh, that you don't have self-control.
Yeah.
Might be
Yep.
one.
Very
thing.
easy. Yeah. There's so many different things like, oh, you get that knee pain in our sports medicine world that I was very active in. All sorts of assumptions can be made very quickly about just about everything.
Yeah.
And yeah, it might hold true about 60% of the time, but that other 40% of the time, I personally, this is where I started to become a good physician and started
Absolutely.
actually understanding that other smaller percentage. And then I unidentified from my profession because of that, because I actually went down the path of trying to connect with people and realizing that everything is a percentage base and I need to figure out which percentage they were.
Yeah. Yeah. Where do they fall in that great sort of segmentation of that
Yeah.
condition or situation? And there's often emotion behind all of that, and you can understand behavior decisions that come about. And I love that you were able to recognize, like, okay, I've got judgment, there's an issue here, I'm
Yeah.
not being as effective as a doctor as I could be, I have to change this. So there was that cognitive recognition, and then you started asking a good question.
Yeah. So
And
that's the first two.
asking,
Yep.
yeah, and asking, and that's another one. Uh, People are all over the place in terms of which steps are easier or harder for them, but typically the more educated you are, the bigger trouble you have with judgment. And then asking good questions, similarly, it goes back and forth. Men have trouble listening. But with asking good questions, it is about just being comfortable almost with silence, being comfortable with just lobbing something out there and seeing where somebody might take it and keeping the question open. I tell the story in the book. We'd arrived at a respondent's home, pulled up into the driveway. She happened to be outside tending to a litter of pups that were in a fenced in area in her yard. And we just said, hi, how are you? Like, we didn't have the camera set up. We hadn't signed any of the releases or the paper. And she just went and got started and was telling
Yep.
us all these wonderful details about her life just off of, hi, how are you? And it was incredible. But it's because we asked such a beautiful open question, or asking the question, why, or tell me more about that. I'll build on it. I love that you got to that place of asking that question. I think one thing for people to be aware of with the word why is how that can make some people be on the defensive.
Yeah. Yep.
And
I
I
also
learned,
learned that as well.
yeah. And it's, I mean, why is just constantly in our vocabulary. And, if you're curious, you're always asking why. Well, yes, that's true. But it goes back to then when your mom was asking you, why did you draw on the wall in crayon? Why did you cut your sister's
Oh,
hair?
this is great.
Why did you do, why? And then it plays out. Why are you late to class? Why are you late with this report? Why are you late? Why, and then you can get into relationships and imagine the why question. Why didn't you load the dishwasher? Why did you cheat on me? Why did you, why? And it puts people on the defensive as a result. And whether you've gone to that extreme in a relationship, but just from those childhood experiences, when you get asked why, you get defensive.
Tend to
It's
freeze up. Yeah.
yeah, and you'll freeze up. And so as a moderator, when I was getting trained to moderate, we learned not to, we want to understand why did you buy, hamburger helper? But we're not going to ask that. We're going to say, tell me more about, or how did you decide on what you were going to buy for dinner tonight? Or,
Oh, this is
use
awesome.
all the other words, the how, the what, the where, the when, in order to get at the why.
Yeah.
And then to probe with a really easy question that, just like you were asking why, you were asking why just from the sense of, tell me more about that.
Right.
And it's very appropriate at that point. So, okay, tell me more. What's going on? Why did this happen?
Yep.
What led you to this place? That's a huge challenge for people, to eliminate the word why. And I challenge the people listening to this, take the word why out of your vocabulary just for one day and see what that's like. See how hard
So
it is.
interesting.
And see how it changes your conversation.
You're helping me out so much. This is an amazing correlation for me personally, and I mean, this is the point of this whole podcast, is to share and experiences of. I've done that professionally now. I've switched over, and I don't use the word why anymore. It's very specific of, tell me more about why, or shit.
Tell me about what you're doing.
Yeah, tell me more about this. Hard to do when you're kind of not in real time, but we still do it with our kids. We still parent with the why. And well, now you got me really thinking about, I'm going to talk with my wife about this tonight, and we're going to go over how we can eliminate why with our kids, because it is such this has actually been a very pertinent topic lately. Our kids are 9 and 10, right? They're in that age where they're doing all sorts of cool self-exploration type of things. And if they do something that's a little bit wacky, our first question is to them is, well, why did you do that? And you can immediately see them climb up and shut down, because every part of our parenting style is very open and self-exploration and self-responsibility and those sorts of aspects. And then when we ask them why, they immediately shut down. So this is a huge awareness piece for me.
Awesome. Yeah, it's, tell me more about, or how did that come about? How did you decide to do that? And if you ask, you have the right tone of voice that's open and curious, I'll be curious to hear what they say.
I will definitely let you know. Yeah, we'll do a week challenge we like little challenges with our family. So we'll do a week challenge of eliminating why from our vocabulary. That is wow. That's worth its weight in gold.
Yeah. Oh, that's so awesome. Yay. That's exciting.
Well, so this has been great. I think we're coming pretty close to an end here. What is the one takeaway that you want from all of this great conversation? What is the one takeaway that you want the viewers to have?
To be courageous, to have empathy. There's a great quote from Maya Angelou that says, I believe we all have the ability to have empathy. We may just not have the courage to display it. And I challenge everyone to be courageous, because you all have the ability to have empathy. We just need to step into that and be courageous. If you want to see a different world, be courageous and be that world.
Nice. I love that word.
Thank you.
So 5stepstoempathy.com is how they can go order your book, if I got that correctly. Yep.
Yeah. Wherever they buy books, they should be able to get it. But if you go to number 5stepstoempathy.com, there are links on there to.
Then they're ordering it directly from you. Okay.
No, they're ordering it from.
It's still through Amazon, there. That just gives them. Okay.
Yeah, but it's just a repository.
Perfect. Is there any other way that you'd like them to connect with you?
They can, like you, we can find each other on LinkedIn. Just search Rob Volpe at Empathy Actor, and Rob Volpe Empathy Activist. I'll show up. Follow me on Instagram, empathy_activist. And I always like to put in a plug, if they are so disposed that they are Peloton riders.
Yeah.
You can find me on the Peloton at Empathy Activist as well. I always love doing high fives with people.
Awesome. I'll be sure to put all of that into the show notes for sure. We want to thank everyone for support in their community, and let's have a little bit more empathy now that we know how. So thank you very much.
Awesome. Thanks, Dave.